When it comes to retaining the wrist pin inside of the piston, there are a variety of techniques available. Probably these days, particularly in the sport compact market, the techniques that we're most used to would include wire locks, Spirolox, and perhaps cram locks. However, a technology that's certainly not new is to use a button instead in order to retain the wrist pin. Now we're here with Dan from Diamond Pistons to talk about their own button design and exactly how that works. So Dan, first of all, these buttons, as I've just mentioned, they're not new. They've been around for a long time, but we don't see them that often, particularly in the sport compact market. Can you tell us where the advantages of the button lie?
Yeah, absolutely. So the advantage with a pin button is more so that it's captured style. So it rides against the outside of the cylinder wall, completely stopping it from being able to move anywhere. We manufacture it to the point of where it's on the outside radius of the piston, perfectly machined, so it rides against the cylinder wall with no issues there. When the pin tries to have outward movement or it tries to rotate, the button completely captures it to stop it from going anywhere. It's not going to damage the cylinder wall because of that, so there's no end play on the outside of it.
So I think most people can probably understand with a button on each side of the piston, there's literally nowhere for that wrist pin to be able to get out. But of course, with a conventional, let's say a wire lock, as long as that wire lock's been installed correctly, it's still a relatively reliable installation method. So can you talk to us about some of the disadvantages with the wire locks, Spirolox and cram locks and how they potentially can cause issue?
Sure, absolutely. So with any lock, there's always a potential for failure. With the wire lock, if it's cut into the groove or it has excess motion on the outside of it, it could cut its own groove, it could beat itself out of the lock, but that's also if there's poor oiling in the pin bore or anything like that. When it does that, if it pushes its way out, it could fall into the pan, it could cause catastrophe. With the pin button though, it's completely stopping it from doing that. The oil ring actually holds it in place so it can't rotate. It supports the oil ring from underneath too if there's ever a break in the ringland stack there.
All right, let's just talk about that oil control ring as well, because with your pistons, as you've kind of alluded to there, the design of the piston is that the pin button does intersect with the oil control ring. So that's a critical part because it stops the pin button rotating?
Correct, yeah. So with that oil ring sitting there, the pin button actually has a flat cut into it to stop it from moving in any which way. We also can do it with a support rail as well, which is a steel ring that goes on top of it so you can have even more support under that oil ring. The whole reason we do that is that when we drop the ring stack down, we have to get as much material up there as possible. Turbo application, nitro application, you put a lot of heat into the crown of the piston, so we try and drop it down as much as we can, and when we do that, we end up intersecting into that pin bore. The reason with the button is that not only do you get that material you took out, but then at the same time, it's aluminum. It's not going to go anywhere. The steel support rail does work very well, but at the same time, you're getting two benefits at one.
All right, I just want to talk a little bit about the location of those ring packs you've just mentioned there. So conventionally, we do see the oil control ring intersecting the pin boss in a lot of designs, but typically this is where the compression height of the piston has been reduced to accommodate a longer connecting rod. But what you're saying here is you're doing this anyway, naturally, even with a stock compression height, you are dropping that ring pack down on the piston?
Yep, that is correct. And the whole reason we do that, again, is just for power application. So the more surface area you have on that piston, the more heat it can take, the less likely it is to fail. And it's not just the top land either. So the second land also needs to have a lot of material on it to support that ring. When you're putting in 40, 60, 80 pounds of boost into the top of the piston, you need that support underneath that top ring, and you also need the surface area as well to be able to handle all that heat.
So this essentially becomes more critical with power adders, that basically the more power you're making, the thicker you want those ringlands to be?
That is correct. You'll see in a lot of naturally aspirated applications where they'll have a real short ringland. The reason is they want as much heat as they can in that piston to increase that combustion effort. With the big power adder stuff, you don't need that, especially with the fuels they run. If they're running anything with methanol or anything like a pure racing fuel, again, you're generating a lot of heat. You're putting as much timing into it as possible. The likelihood of that aluminum flexing, even warping, burning a hole through it, you need as much material there as possible.
So if you're in a situation where you've got a client that is running a power adder, forced induction, and they also want to run a longer rod, is this a situation where you kind of need to make some compromises with the piston design in order to basically just fit everything in?
That is correct, yeah. So the longer the rod you go, you're sacrificing integrity of the piston. So let's say you could run, like let's say an inch 200 compression height on a standard rod length. You go to a longer rod, let's say like a +5 or something like that, that's very common. You end up putting that in there. Now the piston is shortening up that much more. What you need to worry about when doing that is now everything is intersecting. I can't put as much ring land into it. I can't put as much ring into it, so everything's affected. If I could run like a 1.5 millimeter top ring, now I have to run like an 043 or a 1 mil. All of that, if you're doing a power adder especially, you're putting more heat into that ring, it can fail because there's less surface area.
Now, actually, you've just mentioned the ring thickness, so I just want to dive into that a little bit more, because we have seen a drive with aftermarket piston manufacturers, well, and the ring manufacturers over the years, where the ring packs have become thinner and thinner. And my understanding on that is the thinner the ring, it reduces the frictional losses, but you've just mentioned there can be some advantages with a thicker ring. So can you just talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thicker the ring, the more heat it can handle. Most of the rings that we use are steel top rings anyway, but if I can put a 1.5 millimeter or an older, like 1/16 top ring in it, that ring is going to be able to take that much more heat just because of the surface area. As it dissipates, having the larger area, it's going to move into that crown of the piston from the ring. So the bigger it is, the more I can take as far as heat putting into it. It also helps with structure as well. So if you have a thicker top ring, especially with the depth and everything like that, you're going to be able to put a lot more on top of the piston, whether it be nitrous, again, turbo, supercharger, whatever it may be, and it's going to be able to support that boost. With a smaller ring, when you get into the 1 millimeter, even into some of like the 0.7 stuff, where all that frictional loss is gone in a naturally aspirated application, sure, it's great. It's going to help the piston move freely in the bore. But at the same time, if you put a lot of power into it, the likelihood of it flexing, annealing, or trying to butt the ring ends together, it will fail.
All right, just moving back to those pin bosses, or buttons I should say there. Your ones, obviously, as we've talked about, are made out of aluminium, and I know that probably a technique that was used back in the day was to use a Teflon button. Can you talk to us about the advantages of the alloy over a Teflon?
Yeah, with the aluminum, it's the same thing. So as we machine it, when we have the tolerances the way that we have them, if it's machined properly, it should never move, it should never flex. When you put something like Teflon in there, yes, it's going to glide well, but at the same time, it doesn't have the same type of structure as something that like an aluminum part would. So we use that to make sure that at that time, the oil ring can't go anywhere, there's not going to be any flexing, failure, any of those things happening.
I think probably another aspect is that most people would sort of consider the Teflon material is going to basically do no damage to the bore wall, but as you've sort of alluded to earlier in this interview, the aluminium buttons that you produce actually don't end up contacting the bore wall. Basically, they are supported on that oil film. Is that correct?
That is correct. The other thing too is you have to think the actual piston itself, where it is contacting the bore, is aluminum. If it's set up properly and you pull a piston out and the bore looks okay, that has force on it from either a compression stroke or something like that. With a button just riding in the outside of the walls where there's oil coating it, there should be no contact issues or failures.
Look, great to get some insight into those buttons. Thanks for giving us a bit of a description on how they work. If our viewers want to get a little bit more information or reach out to Diamond, how can they do so?
Yeah, you can go right to our website. It's diamondracing.net, or you can even email me. It's dfonz@diamondracing.net.
Awesome. Thanks for your time there, Dan.
Thank you so much.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.